The morning Jacob Hayes buried his wife Sarah, he thought his heart had died with her. Standing beside the simple wooden cross he'd carved with his own hands, watching the Wyoming wind scatter dust across her grave, he felt as hollow as a dried gourd. Sarah had been gone 3 months now, taken by the fever that swept through Willow Creek that terrible winter. But Jacob still expected to see her smile when he came in from the range, still listened for her voice calling him to supper. The silence in their small ranch house was deafening. At 32, Jacob was considered a young man by frontier standards, but grief had aged him beyond his years. His sandy hair was showing premature gray at the temples, and his blue eyes held a sadness that worried his neighbors. Most of them expected him to pack up and leave Wyoming, to return to the civilized world back east where a man could start over. Instead, Jacob had surprised everyone by staying, by continuing to work his small cattle ranch as if Sarah might return any day to see what he'd accomplished. But the truth was, he stayed because leaving would mean abandoning the only place where her memory lived. On this particular morning, as he stood looking out over the rolling prairie that stretched endlessly toward the horizon, Jacob wasn't thinking about the past. He was thinking about the future, or more precisely, about whether he and his neighbors would have won. The conflict had been building for months. What had started as isolated incidents, missing cattle, burned-out homesteads, travelers who simply disappeared, had escalated into something approaching open warfare between the white settlers of Willow Creek and the Comanche bands that still roamed the vast Wyoming territory. Both sides had legitimate grievances. The settlers complained that their property was being raided, their families threatened. The Comanche, led by the formidable chief Iron Bear, argued that their traditional hunting grounds were being invaded by people who showed no respect for the land or the treaties that were supposed to protect native rights. The situation had reached a breaking point 2 weeks ago when a Comanche hunting party was attacked by a group of vigilante ranchers. 3 young warriors had been killed, and Chief Iron Bear had responded by threatening to drive every white settler from the territory. That's when Medicine Crow, the tribe's respected elder and peace chief, had approached Jacob with a proposal that no one could have anticipated. "You are known as a man of honor," Medicine Crow had said in his careful English, sitting across from Jacob in the ranch house kitchen, where Sarah had once served coffee to visitors. "Your wife was kind to our people when they came seeking trade. You have not participated in the raids against our camps." Jacob had nodded, waiting to hear what the old chief wanted from him. "There is a way to prevent the war that will destroy both our peoples," Medicine Crow continued. "But it requires a sacrifice from someone who has already sacrificed much." The proposal, when it came, had been stunning in its simplicity and devastating in its implications. Medicine Crow's granddaughter, Star Dancing, was 18 years old and considered one of the most beautiful and accomplished young women among the Comanche. She had been promised in marriage to a warrior from another band, a union that would have strengthened tribal alliances. But if she were to marry a respected white man instead, someone who could serve as a bridge between the communities, it might be possible to negotiate a lasting peace. "Why me?" Jacob had asked, his mind reeling from the magnitude of what was being suggested. "Because you have shown that you can love someone from a different world," Medicine Crow replied gently. "Your wife was from the East, was she not? A woman of books and gentle ways, not born to this harsh land. Yet you made a life together that honored both your backgrounds." The old chief had paused, his weathered face grave with the weight of what he was proposing. "Star Dancing is willing to make this sacrifice if you are. She understands that it may be the only way to save both our peoples from destruction. But the choice must be yours freely given, not forced by circumstances." Jacob had asked for 3 days to consider the proposal. Now, standing beside Sarah's grave with the morning sun climbing higher in the endless Wyoming sky, he knew what his answer had to be. He couldn't bring Sarah back, but he might be able to prevent other families from losing their loved ones to a war that would benefit no one. "I'm sorry, darling," he whispered to the wooden cross. "But I think you'd understand. You always said the most important thing was to do what was right, even when it cost everything." That afternoon, Jacob rode to the designated meeting place where Medicine Crow was waiting with his answer. "I'll do it," he said simply. "When do we begin?" Star Dancing stood at the edge of the Comanche camp, her dark eyes fixed on the horizon where the Wyoming prairie met the sky. At 18, she possessed the kind of natural beauty that transcended cultural boundaries, high cheekbones that spoke of her noble lineage, long black hair that caught the sunlight like silk, and an inner strength that was evident in every movement. But today, she felt anything but strong. Today, she was preparing to leave everything she had ever known to marry a white stranger in hopes of preventing a war. "You do not have to do this, granddaughter," said a gentle voice behind her. Star Dancing turned to see Medicine Crow approaching, his ancient face etched with concern and love. As the tribe's peace chief and her grandfather, he had been the architect of this proposed alliance, but she could see that he was wrestling with doubts about asking such a sacrifice from his own family. "I know, grandfather," she replied in the Comanche tongue they shared, "but we both know it may be the only way. Too many have died already, and more will die if nothing changes." Medicine Crow studied his granddaughter's face, seeing in her the same courage and wisdom that had made her grandmother a legendary figure among their people. "Tell me about this Jacob Hayes," Star Dancing requested. "What kind of man am I to marry?" The old chief settled beside her on a fallen log, gathering his thoughts before he spoke. "He is a man who knows grief, as you do. His wife died this past winter, and he has not recovered from the loss. Some say he never will." Star Dancing nodded. She had lost her parents to disease 3 years earlier, and she understood the weight of such sorrow. "But he is also a man who keeps his word," Medicine Crow continued. "When the angry ranchers came to drive out the peaceful traders, Hayes stood with us. When children in our camp were hungry during the hard winter, his wife sent food with no expectation of payment. And now he is willing to marry a stranger to prevent war? He is. The question, granddaughter, is whether you are truly willing to bind your life to his." Star Dancing considered this carefully. The marriage she was abandoning, to Strong Wolf of the Northern Band, had been arranged for political reasons, but at least it would have been a union with someone who shared her culture and language. Marrying Jacob Hayes would mean entering a world where everything from the food to the customs would be foreign to her. "What does he expect from this marriage?" she asked. Medicine Crow's expression grew thoughtful. "When I spoke with him, he made it clear that he understood this was an arrangement born of necessity, not romance. He promised to treat you with respect and to protect you from any who might show hostility. Beyond that," the old chief shrugged, "I believe he is still too lost in grief to think much beyond preventing bloodshed." "Good," Star Dancing said firmly. "I do not seek love from this union. I seek the chance to prove that our peoples can coexist without destroying each other. And if love does come in time?" Star Dancing was quiet for a long moment, watching an eagle circle high above the prairie. "Then I will face that possibility when it arrives. For now, it is enough to know that I can help prevent my people from walking the path of war." The wedding ceremony, when it took place 2 days later, was unlike anything either culture had traditionally practiced. It was held at the neutral ground between the Comanche camp and Willow Creek, with Medicine Crow officiating according to both tribal customs and territorial law. Jacob arrived dressed in his best clothes, a simple black suit that he had worn to marry Sarah 5 years earlier. Star Dancing wore traditional Comanche wedding attire, a white doeskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork and porcupine quills, her long hair braided with silver ornaments that had belonged to her grandmother. The ceremony itself was brief and solemn, conducted in both English and Comanche. There were no guests beyond the few witnesses required by law, no celebration, no joy. Just 2 people binding their lives together in service of a cause greater than their individual happiness. As Jacob placed a simple gold band on Star Dancing's finger, the same ring Sarah had worn, he whispered words that only she could hear. "I promise to honor and protect you, Star Dancing. I cannot promise love, for my heart is still buried with my first wife. But I can promise respect, kindness, and my commitment to the peace we're trying to build." Star Dancing nodded, understanding more than he might have expected. "And I promise to be a worthy partner in this endeavor, Jacob Hayes. Together, we will show both our peoples that there is another path besides endless conflict." As the simple ceremony concluded and they prepared to ride toward Jacob's ranch, her new home, Star Dancing felt the weight of expectations settling on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. She was no longer just the granddaughter of Medicine Crow or the daughter of her honored parents. She was now the bridge between 2 worlds, the living symbol of whether peace was possible in a land accustomed to war. But as they rode away from everything she had ever known, Star Dancing couldn't shake the feeling that their real test was yet to come. The Hayes Ranch sat in a valley between 2 low hills, sheltered from the worst of the Wyoming winds, but still exposed to the vast sky that seemed to stretch forever in all directions. As Jacob and Star Dancing approached the modest homestead in the fading light of their wedding day, both of them felt the weight of the decision they had made. The ranch house was small but well built, constructed of logs that Jacob had cut and fitted himself during his first year in Wyoming. A stone chimney rose from one end, and a covered porch provided protection from the elements. Behind the house stood a barn large enough for their horses and the few cattle that represented Jacob's modest prosperity. It was here, in the barn, that they had decided to spend their first night as husband and wife. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. They were seeking shelter in a neutral space, neither fully in the white world nor the Comanche world, but somewhere in between. "It's not much," Jacob said as he helped Star dancing down from her horse, his voice carrying the awkwardness of a man who hadn't expected to be married again so soon after losing his first wife. "It is honest work and honest shelter," Star Dancing replied, her English careful but clear. "That is more than many people have." Jacob looked at her with surprise. Her English was much better than he had expected, and her response showed a practical wisdom that impressed him. "You speak my language well," he observed. "My grandfather insisted that I learn. He said that understanding your enemy's words was the first step toward making them into friends." She paused, then added quietly, "I hope that was wisdom, not naivete." As they settled into the barn for the night, laying out blankets in the sweet-smelling hay, both of them struggled with the awkwardness of their situation. They were married in the eyes of both their peoples and the law, but they were still strangers to each other. "Star Dancing," Jacob said as they prepared to sleep, "I want you to understand something about this arrangement. I will not, that is, I don't expect. What I mean is—" "You mean you will not force yourself upon me," she said calmly, saving him from his stammering explanation. "I understand this. Among my people, a marriage of alliance is different from a marriage of love. There are expectations, but also protections." Jacob felt relief wash over him. "Thank you for understanding. I'm not sure I'm ready for anything beyond what we've already committed to." Star Dancing studied his face in the dim light filtering through the barn's small windows. "You still love your first wife?" It wasn't a question, and Jacob didn't treat it as one. "Yes. I don't know if that will ever change." "Good," Star Dancing replied, surprising him. "A man who can love deeply is a man who can be trusted. I would rather share a home with someone capable of love than with someone incapable of it." They settled into a companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the momentous step they had taken. But as the hours passed and true darkness fell over the Wyoming prairie, they began to hear something that made both of them tense with apprehension. It started as a distant rumbling, so faint it might have been mistaken for thunder. But the sound grew steadily louder and more distinct, resolving itself into the unmistakable rhythm of many horses moving at speed across the grassland. "Jacob," Star Dancing whispered, her voice tight with concern. "I hear it," he replied, moving to the barn's small window to peer out into the darkness. What he saw made his blood run cold. Arranged in a vast semicircle around the ranch buildings, barely visible in the starlight, were more mounted warriors than he had ever seen in one place. They sat motionless on their horses, as still as statues, but their presence was unmistakable. "How many?" Star Dancing asked, joining him at the window. Jacob tried to count the shadowy figures, but there were too many and the darkness was too deep for an accurate assessment. 50, maybe more. Maybe a lot more. Star Dancing closed her eyes briefly, and Jacob could see her lips moving in what might have been a prayer or a curse. "These are not my grandfather's men," she said quietly. "Medicine Crow would not approve of such a display. These must be warriors from other bands, perhaps followers of War Eagle, or those who believe that peace with whites is impossible." "What do they want?" Jacob asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "They want to test us," Star Dancing replied. "To see if this marriage is real or just a trick. To see if a white man will truly stand with a Comanche woman when the pressure becomes unbearable." Jacob felt his heart pounding in his chest, but he also felt something else, a determination he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Star Dancing had given up everything she had ever known to make this alliance work. The least he could do was prove worthy of her sacrifice. "Then I suppose," he said quietly, "we'd better not disappoint them." As the night deepened and the silent watchers maintained their vigil, Jacob and Star Dancing prepared for whatever test the dawn might bring. Dawn came slowly to the Wyoming prairie, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold that should have been beautiful but felt ominous under the circumstances. As the light grew stronger, Jacob and Star Dancing could see the full scope of what surrounded them. More than 100 Comanche warriors sat on their horses in a perfect circle around the ranch, their faces painted for war, their weapons visible but not yet raised in direct threat. The sight was both magnificent and terrifying, a display of controlled power that spoke of years of military precision and cultural discipline. "My God," Jacob breathed, taking in the sheer number of fighters arrayed against them. Star Dancing stood beside him at the barn door, her face calm despite the gravity of their situation. "They are testing us," she said quietly, "but they are also honoring us with their presence. To gather so many warriors for a single purpose, this is not done lightly." "What kind of test?" Jacob asked, though he was beginning to understand that the answer might determine whether they lived to see another sunset. Before Star Dancing could respond, a single rider separated himself from the circle and began approaching the barn at a slow, deliberate pace. The warrior was clearly a man of importance. His horse was magnificent, his weapons ornate, and his bearing spoke of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "War Eagle," Star Dancing murmured, recognition and concern clear in her voice. "You know him? He is my cousin, son of my father's brother. He has always believed that accommodation with whites is weakness, that the only way to preserve our people is through strength and resistance." War Eagle dismounted about 30 feet from the barn and stood waiting, clearly expecting them to come out and face him. His message was unmistakable. The time for hiding behind walls had ended. "Stay behind me," Jacob said, reaching for his rifle. "No," Star Dancing replied firmly, placing a hand on his arm. "If we are to prove that this marriage means something, we must face them together, as equals. And Jacob, bring no weapons. War Eagle must see that we come in peace, not in defiance." Jacob felt every instinct screaming against walking unarmed into what looked like a war council, but he recognized the wisdom in Star Dancing's words. This was about more than just their personal safety. It was about proving that cooperation was possible. Together, they walked out of the barn to face War Eagle and the assembled warriors. The Comanche war leader was a man in his 30s, tall and powerfully built, with the scars of numerous battles marking his face and arms. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the silent prairie. "Star Dancing, daughter of Brave Wolf, granddaughter of Medicine Crow," he said in Comanche, his tone formal and challenging. "You have shamed your family and your people by binding yourself to this white man. I have come to offer you one last chance to return to your true people with honor." Star Dancing stepped forward, her chin raised with defiant pride. "I have brought no shame to our family, War Eagle. I have chosen to sacrifice my personal happiness for the greater good of all our people, white and Comanche alike. This is the way of honor." "This is the way of weakness," War Eagle replied harshly. "You have given yourself to our enemies in the hope that they will show mercy. But mercy from whites is like water in the desert, a mirage that disappears when you try to grasp it." Jacob understood enough of the conversation to recognize that this was a critical moment. Stepping forward to stand beside his wife, he addressed War Eagle in his limited but respectful Comanche. "I am Jacob Hayes," he said, his pronunciation careful but sincere. "I have taken Star Dancing as my wife to honor her, not to claim her as property. I wish peace between our peoples, not surrender from yours." War Eagle's eyes narrowed as he studied Jacob, clearly surprised to hear a white man attempting to speak their language. "Pretty words," he replied in English, switching languages to ensure that Jacob understood every word. "But words are like the wind, they blow strong for a moment, then disappear. It is actions that reveal a man's true heart." "Then judge me by my actions," Jacob replied steadily. "I married your cousin to prevent war, knowing it would make me a target for hatred from both sides. I stand here unarmed, trusting in the honor of warriors I have never met. These are not the actions of a man who seeks to deceive or exploit." War Eagle walked slowly around them, his eyes taking in every detail of their appearance and bearing. The other warriors watched in silence, waiting to see how their leader would respond to this unprecedented situation. "You speak of trust, white man," War Eagle said finally. "But trust must be earned, not given freely. I propose a test, one that will prove whether this marriage is real or merely a performance for political advantage." "What kind of test?" Star Dancing asked, though Jacob could hear the tension in her voice. War Eagle smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "You will live among us for one full cycle of the moon. You will share our food, our hardships, our dangers. If at the end of that time you still choose to be husband and wife, then perhaps this alliance has meaning. If not," he shrugged, "then we will know that peace between our peoples is impossible, and we will act accordingly." The challenge was clear: prove their commitment by living as Comanche for a month, or face the consequences of a failed experiment in peace. Jacob looked at Star Dancing, seeing in her eyes both fear and determination. This wasn't what either of them had expected, but it was the test they had been given. "We accept," Star Dancing said firmly, speaking for both of them. War Eagle nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Then gather what you need, white man. Your education in what it means to be Comanche begins now." Living among the Comanche was like stepping into a world that operated by completely different rules than anything Jacob had ever experienced. The band that War Eagle led was constantly in motion, following game trails and seasonal patterns that had been established over countless generations. Jacob quickly learned that everything he thought he knew about survival on the frontier was merely the beginning of a much deeper education. "Your saddle is wrong for long travel," observed Swift Horse, one of the younger warriors who had been assigned to teach Jacob the basics of Comanche horsemanship. "It is made for short rides to check cattle, not for days on the prairie following buffalo." Jacob looked down at his familiar western saddle, then at the simple pad and blanket arrangement that the Comanche used. "It looks like you'd slide right off." "Only if you fight the horse instead of becoming part of it," Swift Horse replied with a grin. "Here, let me show you." The lessons that followed were humbling for a man who had considered himself an accomplished horseman. The Comanche didn't just ride horses, they became extensions of their mounts, capable of feats that seemed to defy physics. Jacob watched in amazement as warriors could hang from the side of a galloping horse, using the animal's body as a shield while maintaining perfect control with just their legs and balance. "Your people think of horses as tools," Star Dancing explained as they rode together during one of the band's daily migrations. "My people think of them as partners. The difference shows in everything we do." She was right, Jacob realized. Among the Comanche, horses were treated with a respect and consideration that went far beyond mere utility. They were fed first, watered first, and their needs were considered in every decision the band made. But it wasn't just horsemanship that challenged Jacob's assumptions. The entire structure of Comanche society was different from anything he had experienced. Leadership was based on merit and consensus rather than formal hierarchy. Decisions were made through discussion and agreement rather than authoritarian decree, and individual freedom was balanced with collective responsibility in ways that seemed almost impossibly sophisticated. "You are learning," Medicine Crow observed one evening as Jacob practiced setting up a teepee with Star Dancing's guidance. "But you are learning with your hands and your eyes. To truly understand our people, you must also learn with your heart." "What do you mean?" Jacob asked, pausing in his struggle with the lodge poles. The old chief gestured toward the camp around them, where families were settling in for the night, children were playing traditional games, and elders were sharing stories around small fires. "You see a group of people living in primitive conditions," Medicine Crow said gently. "But what you should see is a community that has survived and thrived for 1,000 years by understanding that true wealth comes not from accumulating possessions, but from maintaining connections to the land, to the animals, to each other, and to the spirits that guide all life." Jacob felt something shift in his understanding as he watched the scene Medicine Crow had described. These weren't primitive people struggling to survive. They were members of a highly sophisticated culture that had developed solutions to problems that white society was still grappling with. "How do you maintain unity when you're constantly moving?" Jacob asked. "In white settlements, people need buildings, institutions, formal structures to hold communities together. Our structures are not made of wood and stone," Star Dancing replied, joining their conversation. "They are made of relationships, traditions, and shared values. These things are portable, and they are stronger than any building because they live in people's hearts rather than in one place." As the days passed and Jacob gradually adapted to the rhythm of Comanche life, he began to understand what Medicine Crow had been trying to teach him. This wasn't just a different way of living, it was a different way of thinking about what human communities could be. But the test wasn't just about Jacob learning Comanche ways. Star Dancing was also being challenged to prove her commitment to the alliance she had chosen. "Some of the women question whether you can truly be happy with a white husband," revealed Moonflower, Star Dancing's cousin, as they worked together preparing buffalo meat for winter storage. "They worry that you have sacrificed too much for a peace that may not last." Star Dancing considered this carefully as she sliced meat into thin strips for drying. "I worry about that too," she admitted. "But I also know that the alternative, endless war, offers no happiness for anyone. If this marriage can create even the possibility of a different future, then it is worth whatever personal cost." "And Jacob Hayes? Do you think he truly accepts our ways, or is he just enduring them until the test is over?" Star Dancing looked across the camp to where Jacob was learning to track game with some of the younger warriors. 3 weeks among the Comanche had changed him visibly. His movements were more fluid, his eyes more alert to the subtle signs of the natural world, and his interactions with the band had evolved from formal courtesy to genuine friendship. "He is learning," she said finally. "Not just our customs, but our way of seeing the world. Whether that will be enough." She shrugged. "We will know soon enough." As the final week of their trial began, both Jacob and Star Dancing knew that the real test was yet to come. War Eagle had been watching them carefully, evaluating not just their ability to adapt, but their commitment to each other and to the ideal of peace they represented. Soon, they would learn whether their month among the Comanche had proven their worthiness, or whether it had revealed the impossibility of the dream they had tried to make real. The final test came not as War Eagle had planned it, but as life on the frontier often delivered its most crucial moments, suddenly, violently, and without warning. Jacob was returning from a hunting expedition with Swift Horse and 2 other young warriors when they spotted smoke rising from the direction of the main camp. It wasn't the controlled smoke of cooking fires or ceremonial purposes, but the thick, dark smoke that spoke of destruction. "Raiders," Swift Horse said grimly, urging his horse to greater speed. "We must get back." They arrived to find chaos. A band of white vigilantes had attacked the camp, apparently believing they could strike while many of the warriors were away. But they had underestimated both the fighting ability of those who remained and the speed with which the hunting parties could return. The attack was already over by the time Jacob reached the scene, but the aftermath was devastating. 3 Comanche elders had been killed, several women and children wounded, and many of the band's winter supplies destroyed. The attackers had fled, but not before making it clear that they considered any cooperation with Indians to be treason against their own race. Jacob found Star Dancing kneeling beside the body of an elderly woman who had been like a grandmother to her. Tears streamed down his wife's face, but her expression was one of fury rather than grief. "This is what your people call peace," she said without looking up at him. "They speak of friendship with one hand, while they hold knives behind their backs with the other." Star Dancing, "Don't," she interrupted, finally meeting his eyes. "Don't tell me these were not your people, because they were. Don't tell me this wasn't about our marriage, because it was. They came here because they saw cooperation with whites as a sign of weakness, and they wanted to prove that weakness has consequences." Jacob felt his heart breaking as he saw the pain and disillusionment in his wife's face. Everything they had worked for, everything they had sacrificed, seemed to be crumbling in the face of the hatred and violence they had tried so hard to prevent. War Eagle approached, his face dark with anger, and something that might have been satisfaction at seeing his predictions proven correct. "So, white man," he said coldly, "this is the peace you promised my cousin. This is the protection your people offer to those who trust them." Jacob looked around at the destruction, at the grieving families, at the shattered dream of cooperation that lay in ruins around him. Part of him wanted to mount his horse and ride away, to abandon this impossible task and return to the simple sorrow of his lonely ranch. Instead, he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He walked to the center of the camp, raised his voice, and addressed the entire band in his carefully learned Comanche. "I am Jacob Hayes," he called out. "I am husband to Star Dancing, friend to Medicine Crow, and ally to all who seek peace. The men who did this evil thing, they are not my people. They are enemies of everything I believe in, everything we have worked to build together." The camp fell silent, all eyes focused on the white man who stood alone among them, making a declaration that would mark him as a traitor to his own race. "I cannot bring back those who have died," Jacob continued, his voice growing stronger. "I cannot undo the harm that has been done. But I can promise you this. I will help you find the men who did this, and I will help you make sure they face justice. Not Comanche justice or white justice, but true justice." War Eagle stepped forward, his eyes narrow with suspicion. "Pretty words again, white man. But what actions will follow them?" Jacob met his gaze steadily. "I know who these men are. I recognize their methods, their cowardice. They are the same vigilantes who have been causing trouble throughout the territory, hiding behind claims of self-defense while they murder innocents." He paused, looking around at the faces surrounding him. Some hostile, some hopeful, all waiting to see what he would do next. "I propose we take this evidence to the territorial marshal," Jacob said. "We demand a real investigation, real arrests, real justice under the law that is supposed to protect all people in this territory. And if the law fails us, then we consider other options." The law of white men will not protect Indians, War Eagle replied scornfully. Maybe not, Jacob admitted, but it's worth trying before we abandon hope of peace entirely. And if it does fail, he looked directly at War Eagle. Then you will have the satisfaction of knowing you were right, and I will stand with you in whatever action you choose to take. The declaration sent a ripple of shock through the assembled Comanche. A white man offering to stand with them against his own people's law. It was almost unprecedented. Star Dancing rose from beside the dead woman and walked to Jacob's side. Taking his hand in hers, she spoke to the band in their own language. My husband speaks truth, she said. He offers to risk everything he has ever known for the sake of justice. This is not the behavior of a man who seeks to deceive us. Medicine Crow, who had been silent through the entire exchange, finally stepped forward. The test is complete, he announced formally. Jacob Hayes has proven that he understands what it means to be Comanche. Not because he has learned our customs, but because he has shown that he will choose what is right over what is easy, even when that choice puts him in danger. War Eagle studied both Jacob and Star Dancing for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Very well, he said finally. We will try your way first, white man. But understand this. If your law fails to deliver justice for our dead, then we will seek it by our own methods. And you will be expected to honor the promise you have made here today. Jacob nodded grimly. He understood that he had just committed himself to a path that might lead to open conflict with his own people. But as he looked at Star Dancing's face, seeing hope beginning to replace despair in her eyes, he knew he had made the only choice he could live with. The test was over. Now came the real challenge, proving that justice could exist in a world where fear and hatred seemed to rule. 3 months later, Jacob Hayes stood in the territorial courthouse in Cheyenne, watching as the last of the vigilantes who had attacked the Comanche camp was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. The investigation he had demanded had been thorough and successful, resulting in the arrest and conviction of 12 men who had been terrorizing both white and Indian communities throughout the territory. Beside him, Star Dancing observed the proceedings with satisfaction tempered by sorrow. Justice had been done, but it could not bring back the elders who had died or undo the trauma inflicted on her people. It's finished, Jacob said quietly as they left the courthouse together. This part is finished, Star Dancing corrected. But the real work is just beginning. She was right, Jacob realized. The successful prosecution of the vigilantes had proven that cooperation between white and Indian communities could achieve results that neither could accomplish alone. But it had also made them targets for those who opposed any form of racial cooperation. Their marriage had become a symbol throughout the territory. To some, a beacon of hope for peaceful coexistence, to others, a betrayal of racial loyalty that threatened the established order. They had received both praise and death threats, offers of support and promises of violence. Do you regret it? Jacob asked as they walked toward the hotel, where they would spend the night before returning to Wyoming. Any of it? Star Dancing considered the question seriously. I regret the pain that has been caused, the lives that have been lost. But I do not regret the choice we made. We have proven that peace is possible when people of good will work together. Even if it means being outcasts from both our communities? We are not outcasts, Star Dancing replied firmly. We have found a new community. People from both races who believe in justice over prejudice, in cooperation over conflict. That community may be small, but it is growing. She was right about that too. The months since their marriage had brought them into contact with others who shared their vision. White settlers who had grown tired of living in fear, Indian leaders who saw cooperation as the only path to survival, territorial officials who recognized that peace was better for everyone than endless conflict. Together, they had begun to build something new. Not a replacement for either Comanche or white society, but a bridge between them that allowed for mutual understanding and respect. There's something I need to tell you, Jacob said as they reached their hotel. Something I should have said long ago. Star Dancing looked at him with curiosity, sensing the importance of whatever he was about to say. When I married you, Jacob continued, his voice carefully controlled, it was for duty, for the hope of peace. I told you then that my heart was buried with Sarah, and I believed that was true. Star Dancing felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her expression neutral. And now I know that hearts can heal, even when we think they're beyond repair. These months with you, living among your people, learning to see the world through your eyes. Star Dancing, you've brought my heart back to life. The admission hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Star Dancing had felt the change in their relationship over the past months. The way Jacob looked at her, the care he showed for her comfort and happiness that went beyond mere duty, the protective anger he had shown when others criticized their marriage. "Jacob," she said softly, "I need you to understand something. When I agreed to this marriage, I told myself I was sacrificing personal happiness for a greater cause. But the truth is, I stopped thinking of it as a sacrifice weeks ago." They stood facing each other in the fading light of the Wyoming evening, two people who had begun as strangers bound by duty, and had gradually become something neither of them had expected to find. "Are you saying?" Jacob began. "I'm saying that I love you," Star Dancing replied simply. "Not because you saved my people from war, not because you proved yourself worthy among the Comanche, but because you are a man of honor and kindness who has shown me that love can grow even from the most unlikely beginnings." Jacob reached out and took her hands in his, feeling for the first time since Sarah's death that his future held possibilities beyond mere survival. "I love you too," he said. "More than I thought possible, more than I believed my heart could hold again." Their first real kiss as husband and wife took place not in the privacy of their hotel room, but on the main street of Cheyenne, witnessed by the setting sun and the vast Wyoming sky that had overseen their entire journey from strangers to partners to lovers. When they finally broke apart, Jacob saw tears in Star Dancing's eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked, concerned. "Nothing's wrong," she replied, smiling through her tears. "Everything is finally right. We started this marriage to prevent a war, but we've ended up creating something beautiful." As they walked into the hotel together, truly husband and wife for the first time, neither of them noticed the small group of Comanche warriors who had been watching from across the street. War Eagle stepped forward from their midst, a satisfied expression on his scarred face. "The test is truly complete," he said to his companions in their native tongue. "They have learned not just to respect each other's peoples, but to love each other. This marriage will produce children who belong to both worlds and neither, who can build bridges we cannot even imagine." 6 months later, Jacob and Star Dancing Hayes stood on the porch of their rebuilt ranch house, watching the sun set over a valley that had become a model for peaceful cooperation throughout the territory. Their home now served as a meeting place for white and Indian leaders, seeking to resolve disputes through discussion rather than violence. Star Dancing's hand rested on her gently swelling belly, where their first child grew, a child who would be born into a world where the color of one's skin mattered less than the content of one's character. "Do you think we've really changed anything?" Star Dancing asked, her voice thoughtful as she watched a mixed group of children playing together in their front yard, white settlers' children and young Comanche learning each other's games and languages. "Look around you," Jacob replied, putting his arm around his wife's shoulders. 6 months ago, this valley was on the edge of war. Now it's becoming a place where two peoples are learning to live as neighbors instead of enemies.